Brad Loncar back with us, joining from Loncar Investments, of course. Brad, great to have you here on a Friday. Let's start with Gilead. Pretty solid move on this session. What's the news flow here? What's the latest?
Yeah, a lot of biotech stocks had a crazy close today, and I hope that's not a sign that we're in for Armageddon this weekend, because our sector has really been going up on bad COVID news. We have the reopenings right now, and some cases are rising. And that seems to be lifting the sector. And so in Gilead's case, especially since they have remdesivir, that might explain the end-of-day bounce a little bit.
Oh, boy. So you're kind of viewing this at the top of the show. I was talking about Clorox, which is, at the highs and keeps rallying. The pharma companies, some of these connected to COVID, basically the same way. So to be clear, there hasn't really been any important update on remdesivir this week, right?
No, in fact, there was something that you could argue would be bad news for Gilead and remdesivir, but great news for society. There was a study that came out of the UK earlier this week about a commonly used steroid called Dexamethasone. Actually, let me take a step back. One thing that's important to know about remdesivir is the thing that Gilead proved is that it gets people out of the hospital sooner. On average, patients left the hospital 4 days earlier on remdesivir. But they did not prove that it lowers the mortality rate. That's still yet to be determined. So the steroid dexamethasone actually did prove that. For patients who were on ventilators, it lowered their chance of death by about a third, and for patients who were on oxygen by about a fifth. So that's terrific news, because dexamethasone is in every hospital in the world right now. It's a very cheap generic drug that's been around for a while, and it was really great news. And so given that remdesivir is a much more sophisticated and frankly expensive antiviral medicine, you could argue that this is potentially bad news for that, because it's easy to use and it's very inexpensive.
I thought the same thing here this week. Was kind of curious when that news came out. It seemed to be hopeful for risk assets overall for the treatment for the virus. And it's an interesting point here that it hasn't really hit the stocks too much that might benefit, of course, from more drug treatment. What about our current status, to kind of stay with this tone, Brad, the current status of treating the virus? I know you watch this very closely as well, given your research on the companies itself. We are making pretty big strides, right? Even if there is an uptick in cases, should we expect shorter hospitalization times?
Yeah, so those two things, remdesivir and dexamethasones, those are great first steps. What's really going to be needed to knock this out altogether is a vaccine. That's the thing that's actually going to prevent people from getting this in the first place. And we're still many months away from that. But that's what's going to be required to put this to bed. I have a saying, people have talked about containment and how that flattens the curve. I like to say that containment will do the blocking, but it's really going to be science that does the tackling here. And it's going to take a vaccine to really put this story to an end, period. And we're still some time from that. So Moderna, for example, in the United States, which is the vaccine that's farthest along, they recently announced that they're going to start their phase 3 trial in July. You keep hearing these magical dates from the government that they want a vaccine by the fall or winter. That's a little aggressive. That'll probably happen for healthcare workers and other required personnel, policemen, firemen, people like that. But I think it's going to be into next year before the general public has a vaccine. So this is going to be something we're living with. You're hearing headlines today about how cases are rising as states open up, and that's the give and take that comes with something like that. And we're going to be dealing with things like that for a while, unfortunately.
I think it's a good reminder here to think about the time frame as well. Brad, are there any, will we get a sign, a heads up that there's a faster than expected timetable for that? Are there any big tests coming up over the next couple of weeks we should be keeping our eyes out for?
Yeah, so we should be getting some human data from these vaccines. The only data we've seen that's actually published in a medical journal was from a Chinese company called CanSino Biologics. Moderna, which put out a press release, still has not published their full data in a medical journal. We expect that any day now. And the Oxford University vaccine, which is partnered with AstraZeneca, probably should have some data too. And those will be very early stage studies, so the true verdict on whether they work or not will probably not be there, but it could provide some strong suggestions. So once we see that, if they provide strong clues that those vaccines will offer strong protection, those could be big headlines, not just for biotech, but for the entire stock market. We've seen when there's good news like that, it lifts up the entire market, and those things should be coming any day now. So I would watch out for those.
Okay. Brad, one other point from your notes I just want to make sure we hit is the overall sentiment in this market that we've seen play out elsewhere, the huge amounts of bond issuance, the overall froth. Does that mean there's a ton of new biotech companies coming to market? I know you and I discussed this before. What's the latest update?
Absolutely. Biotech IPO market is red hot. We had a few today. And in fact, there was a company that went public earlier this week, Royalty Pharma. They raised $2.5 billion. That's the U.S.'s biggest IPO of the year, period, not just for biotech. And it's the largest biotech IPO ever. So people are just throwing money at the sector. That's a great world-class company. I mean, they deserve the attention. But, generalists want to invest in life sciences. There's plenty of money for it. And that IPO was a great example. And there's a steady pipeline of some really interesting companies coming along. So the IPO market at least suggests that we have a very strong market right now.
Yeah, Brad, great stuff. A crucial update as always. Glad to have you here with the latest for our viewers into the weekend. Good to catch up. Thanks, Brad. Mr. Loncar joining us from Loncar Investments with big moves in biotech. Maybe good for the investors, maybe not the best sign of upcoming headlines for the virus. But as Brad points out, hospitalization now a shorter stay with the treatments that are developing.